I've done these living history sessions with a number of different individuals, eyewitnesses, Parkland hospital doctors, but today is a real special opportunity. This gentleman, his role in the assassination weekend is extremely important, and in fact it's so prominent that we devoted an entire exhibition to his photography. This is Bob Jackson, whose work you've been looking at on the 7th floor. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 1964 for his very, very famous photograph of Jack Ruby shooting Lee Harvey Oswald. And what we're going to do today is go back in time and follow in his footsteps through the weekend of November 22nd, 1963, look at some of his pictures, and get to hear his story firsthand. So please join me in welcoming Bob Jackson as our special guest. Thanks very much for being here and sharing these memories one more time for us. We're going to start with taking a look at you back in late 1963, early 1964. How many of you have with you today digital cameras or cameras on your cell phones, things like that? Probably just about all of you have either a digital camera or a camera on your cell phone. If you look at the camera right here, it's a little bit different than probably what you have in your pocket or your purse. Bob, tell us a little bit about the equipment you used as a photographer in the early 1960s.
Well, of course, we used film as opposed to shooting digital. So we had to go into a dark room, process our film, make prints. Most of the photographers on the staff did their own work. They didn't hand the film to somebody, a lab technician or somebody who could develop it and print it. Everybody tried to do their own darkroom work. But cameras were sometimes really more fun than nowadays. There was more to do, more to learn.
And it probably took quite a bit of effort to become a photographer and know how to compose shots, right?
Well, yes. I didn't go to school to study photography. I did not get a photojournalism degree, which is almost mandatory today if you want to get a job in the business. I was able to photograph a lot of things that I enjoyed being involved in, mainly motor racing, sports cars. And so I built up a portfolio of pictures. It was kind of like on-the-job training, going to the races, shooting pictures there. And then in the Army, I was fortunate enough to do photography work in the Army. So I built up a portfolio so that when I went to the Times Herald to seek a job, I was able to get one. But I had no journalism degree, which you almost have to have now.
It was the summer of 1960. You went to work for the Dallas Times Herald, and the period we're going to be talking about is a couple of years later in November of 1963. And we're going to start that morning at Love Field. You went out. Well, tell us what your official assignment was for that day.
Well, I was assigned to shoot pictures of the president's arrival on Air Force One, and then I was to get into the motorcade and ride through town to the Trade Mart where Kennedy was going to speak. And there were lots of people there at the Trade Mart waiting for his arrival. So that was basically my assignment for the day.
And before Air Force One landed, you of course had a chance to take some pictures of the crowd, and you want to explain that "Let's Bury King John" sign?
Well, probably you all haven't heard of Barry Goldwater, but Barry Goldwater ran for president, and those were some of his supporters that said, "Let's bury King John," speaking of John Kennedy. Mm-hmm. So there were a few of those people there, but they weren't nasty. They weren't throwing things or anything like that, you know. But they had their candidate signs up there for everybody to see. But the majority of the crowd were Kennedy supporters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see this sign here all the way, JFK and LBJ in '64. Of course, because the president was shot November 22nd, 1963, he never had the chance to run for re-election in 1964. But you can see from these signs that already people were starting to contemplate the 1964 presidential election, and Kennedy certainly had some re-election supporters out in the crowd that morning. So then the plane lands, and here's a photograph, Bob, that you took of the Kennedys disembarking the plane. You had actually seen the president a couple of times before and covered him as a photographer.
Yeah, I covered him when he came here to visit Sam Rayburn, Speaker of the House. He was very sick and in the hospital. And then after Rayburn died, I covered the graveside ceremony, and Kennedy was there at that. So I, 2 occasions, had photographed him.
Now, those of us who weren't alive in the 1960s and never had the rare opportunity to see Kennedy in person, we know him through still photographs, black and white photographs, largely just like this one. To see Kennedy in person, is there anything that stands out about him in your memory? Anything about seeing him in living color?
Well, his charisma, I guess, was the big thing that he had, and of course it was exciting to be there and photograph a president. It was a big event for us, but yeah, his charisma, his friendliness with everyone is what really shone through.
Now, when the plane landed, you assumed that the president would probably get from the plane directly into his motorcade, but he actually did something else. He walked over to the fence and started meeting with people.
He hesitated, and then he and Jackie walked over to the fence and started greeting people. So the Secret Service, they weren't too excited about that, because that meant they had to look at a lot more than just leading him to a car, to put him in the presidential car. So I'm not sure, we don't have a picture there that, no, there's that one shot that has a couple of Secret Service people, and they're frowning, they're looking every direction.
But you've told me in the past that this is actually your favorite picture from the airport, right? Yeah,
I think so, because it shows the interaction there, between the crowd.
Right.
People trying to shake his hand.
And you even got the American flag there in the background. Yeah. Really nice.
Yeah.
Even though this was a bad moment for Secret Service agents, this was a really good opportunity for photographers like you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, but we were stepping over each other and, fighting for position, because as he moved along the fence, at least we were all going the same direction. So we just backed up and shot what we could until he left the crowd there.
Yeah. Now, you went from having this wonderful vantage point, being so close to the president, to a situation like this, where you're about 8 cars behind him in the motorcade.
Right.
You were in a press car with a couple of other guys?
3 other guys, yeah. Malcolm Couch, Jimmy Darnell, Tom Dillard. Tom Dillard was chief photographer for the Dallas News. And we were sitting up on the back of the seat just like those guys. We were in a Chevy convertible. So the only thing I could really shoot was what was in front of me or the crowds on each side. So it got to be pretty boring after a while, because it was like this all the way to town.
You were basically just kind of killing time, using this as transportation to the next spot.
Yeah, plus which I failed to mention a while ago, part of my assignment was to give my film at the airport to our chief photographer, who was there with me, and he was going to take the film from the airport back to the paper. And then I was to shoot along the route, and at the end of downtown area, we had a reporter stationed on a street corner, and I was to unload my camera and give my film to him, and he would take my film from just the motorcade route. He would take that back to the paper. As you got into downtown, as you can see, the crowd just got thicker and thicker, 7, 8, 9 people deep. Was the response overall pretty enthusiastic? Oh yeah. Yeah, people were very enthusiastic. I didn't see any negative situations along the way. And these people are so excited, they're actually waving at you. They're waving at us, yeah, so I figured I might as well take a picture. Because the president had already gone by, and now they're waving at us. So yeah. In fact, I remember laughing about that with the guys in the car. Now, one of your Times Herald colleagues was at the Adolphus Hotel and took this great picture of you in the motorcade. There you are with your camera. Is that the one that you're about to unload? About to unload, yeah. Now, as you made the turn from right outside here, Main Street to Houston Street, your camera's unloaded, you put the film in an envelope. Tell us what happened next. Well, as we rounded the corner, Main and Houston, I spotted the reporter that was going to pick up my film, and I tossed the film out, the envelope out to him, and he missed it, and the wind caught it, and he had to kind of chase it a few steps. And we were laughing at him, you know, having to go after the film. And at that point, we heard the first shot. And then a pause, and then two shots closer together. And at that point, I just looked straight up because the sound came from directly in front of me. Of course, we were facing the book depository. And I just looked up. First thing I saw was two men hanging out of a window, and they were looking up above them, you know, obviously straight up above them. So when my eyes went up to that next floor, I could see the rifle resting on the ledge, and then he drew it in. So I knew where the rifle was. I mean, I knew where the shots came from, in my mind. And I said, "There's a rifle," to the other people in the car, and I pointed out the window, which was then empty. By then it was empty. And so that's kind of where we're at that point.
Did the shots all sound consistent? I mean, you recognize them to be gunfire?
I think I did, and I know Tom Dillard did. He, being an old hunter, you know, we discussed it there briefly, and yeah, we both agreed it was a rifle. It was a gunshot, not a backfire.
Now, I think it's important to point out that very few eyewitnesses actually saw a rifle in the sixth-floor corner window of this building. There's only a handful, and Mr. Jackson is one of them. You didn't see who was behind the rifle?
No. Wish I had.
Now, the assassination's taken place. The car is sped off underneath the triple underpass on its way to Parkland Hospital. You're there, empty camera in hand. What's on your mind? What's your next step?
Well, I was trying to figure out what to do next because the guys in the car, the other journalists in the car with me, all wanted to get out. And so they were let out at the intersection there of Elm and Houston. And I said, no, I'm supposed to be going with the president. I'm supposed to photograph his speech. I don't know whether he's been hit or not. So I chose to stay in the car. Plus the driver was wanting to get out of there anyway. So then as I surveyed the scene, just for a moment there, I could see the confusion, the bedlam, people covering up their kids. Motorcycle cop rode his motorcycle up the grassy knoll and just let it keep running. He jumped off, the motorcycle went on till it fell over. And then he went into the book depository with another policeman. And so that made me think at that time, well, there's really nothing for me to shoot here because whatever's going to happen is going to happen in the building. Whoever did the shooting probably won't get out alive anyway. That was my thought. And so I needed to stay with the president. So as we traveled down the hill toward the triple underpass, I saw the look of horror on people's faces. And so I began to have second thoughts about maybe going back up there. So I asked the driver, after we passed through the underpass, I asked the driver to let me out. And I ran back under the triple underpass, still had one empty camera, arrived up at the grassy knoll, and then from what people were saying and everything, I realized he'd been hit, that it was really bad, and that I really screwed up by going back. Because if I'd have stayed in the motorcade, I would have been right there at Parkland Hospital when they unloaded the dead and the wounded, and maybe gotten some really good pictures. So on the grassy knoll there, I had to figure out a way to get to Parkland Hospital. And there were two other photographers, one being from the White House press corps that I recognized. And at this point, and this is a big thing, this probably wouldn't be done today, but the traffic on Elm Street was stacked up, waiting, because they had held it back till the motorcade got by. So within minutes after the shooting, and I'm trying to figure out what am I going to do, how am I going to get to the hospital, here comes the traffic. The police let the traffic go, and there are 2 or 3 lanes of cars going right down over the place where Kennedy was shot. So they were driving over evidence, potential evidence, and I remember thinking, why are they letting the people go this quick? Of course, today you would have yellow tape everywhere, and they would divert the traffic another direction. They'd make them all turn left and go down Houston Street. Anyway, these two other photographers and I flagged down a car that a lady was driving, and we said, can you take us to the hospital, the Parkland Hospital? And she said yes. And so that's how we finally got to Parkland Hospital.
And at Parkland, you found a pretty frustrating situation because you were held outside.
Yeah, I was basically late getting there, and they had already kind of cordoned off the area and were holding the crowds back, people that were there, and not letting us get close to the emergency room entrance. So I just had to wait. And then while I was there, I heard over a police radio the shooting of Officer Tippett in Oak Cliff. And I remember making the comment to somebody standing there by me, I wonder if this has anything to do with what just happened. And, you know, we speculated on that. So I did hear about the shooting of Tippett before they announced that Kennedy had died. And so then, of course, when they announced that, I shot grief pictures, people around me. And I stayed there until the hearse came, removed Kennedy's body, and then to this day, I do not remember how I got back to the newspaper. I bummed a ride with somebody in the media, I'm sure, but I don't remember.
Looking at the pictures of the people so upset, so emotional over the death of the president, you're there as a professional, you have a job to do. Did you have a moment to sort of stop and digest what was happening and the historic implications of this event?
Well, I think I digested it as I worked. I don't think any of us really had time for several days for it all to soak in, you know, the magnitude of what had happened. We were too busy to really think about what happened. You know, different thoughts went through our mind. You know, what are people going to think about the city? Things like that. And so I think we were just too busy working to really go over it in our heads.
Do you remember any of your colleagues, reporters or photographers, having an emotional reaction to the president?
I do remember the chief photographer, John Mazziota, he was pretty upset about it, I remember. And then we had a photographer on the staff who actually was from Ireland, I think born in Ireland, and came here and went to work for the Herald. And he was so upset, he said, I'm going to move away. And he actually did.
Really?
He left. He eventually came back, but he moved to Florida, I believe. And that was Eamon.
Oh, was it really?
Eamon Kennedy.
Oh, wow.
Now, I don't remember when he said, I'm going to leave. I don't remember how many weeks or days after that he decided to move, but he went to work for the Miami Herald, I believe. So he was pretty upset about it.
Yeah.
I don't know of anybody else offhand.
So from Parkland, somehow you made it back to the Times Herald building.
Eventually.
And then you were then sent to Dallas Police Headquarters, where you took this picture. Of course, that's Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged assassin of the president, and he's being escorted here by a Dallas police homicide detective named Elmer Boyd. Tell me about seeing Oswald in the hallway, what you noticed about him.
Well, I noticed the cut on his head, which the ACLU also noticed that, and, you know, he was being mistreated. Of course, he tried to kill the cop that arrested him, or he would have if he'd had a chance.
But he got that cut in the Texas Theater.
In the Texas Theater in the scuffle with the police. He wasn't saying anything. I mean, the time I saw him, he wasn't speaking or anything. I know that he made a few comments in front of the cameras at some point that night, but I wasn't there when he did.
This was one of the only actual pictures you got of Oswald, because the hallways were so crowded it was difficult to even maneuver.
And
right?
they were moving him from one room to another. They questioned him in one room, take him to another room. That's all I knew. And then, of course, members of his family were there, and I was able to photograph them, and you've probably seen those pictures out there.
Well, here's one right here. This is Lee Harvey Oswald's wife, Marina, and his mother, Marguerite. And there's a little story about how you got this picture. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, they'd been questioned by the police, and, and I think it was time for them to be taken home, and they were bringing them down the hall, and the hall was just jammed with people. And so I said, I got to get a picture of them, you know, so I was able to go around them and get in front of them, and with my back against the elevator door. So I was between the elevator and them. Nobody else could get in there but me. I wouldn't have let them, you know, if they'd have tried. But while we're waiting for the elevator to come up, I was able to get this shot, and there were a couple of more too. Mm-hmm. But
I know this is one you're really proud of.
Well, yeah, because I think it shows the strain that's on them, you know, after this a series of events.
And it's worth pointing out that this is not cropped. This is actually the entire frame of the picture, and it's just perfectly composed, considering the pressure that you were under and all the pushing and shoving. It's a really, really good picture. And it doesn't get printed enough. You don't see this picture very often, unfortunately.
No, that's true.
You also took a couple of really nice, kind of poignant pictures, like this one of the lady crying at the desk here. This is actually taken through the glass of the Homicide and Robbery Bureau doorway, one of the few places that the press was not allowed to enter.
All right.
Is this lady what prompted you to take this photograph?
Yeah, I just saw the whole scene there. You know, the guy looking at the paper, and then her hands up to her face, and oh, that's a good picture. So.
Even in really intense, chaotic situations like this, would you always be on the lookout for really human moments?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, come Sunday, Lee Harvey Oswald is going to be transferred from the Dallas City Jail to the Dallas County Jail, and you took this photograph that morning of the armored truck that was originally supposed to transport Oswald. But
yeah, we were down in the basement waiting. We had been brought down as a group from the press room. Incidentally, I'd gone in the police station that morning, and there was no security at the doors. There was nobody there. I just walked in the door and got on the elevator and went up to the press room. So there was nobody checking my credentials or anything like that. And so we were taken down to the basement where they would be bringing Oswald out to put him into a vehicle. So while we're down there waiting, they moved the armored van in, but then they discovered it wouldn't clear the roof. So they couldn't back it down the ramp some 40 feet or so to where Oswald would be, you know, coming out. So I took that picture, and then we began, photographers there, we began to speculate, are they going to put Oswald in that van, walk him all the way up the ramp, or are they going to put him in one of these unmarked police cars, which were also there.
Mm-hmm. And while you're waiting there for Oswald, you also have another assignment adjacent to that, and you almost didn't stay in the basement and take that picture. Tell us about that.
Right. The reporter and I were supposed to go from this assignment to Parkland Hospital, where Governor Connolly was recovering from his wounds. And his wife, Nellie, was having a press conference at about, I think, 10:30. I need to check for sure, but around 10:30. They had told us they were going to move Oswald at 9:30, so we knew that it would be tight. You know, it'd take about 20 minutes probably to get out to the hospital and into the press room. So it became apparent to Bob Finley and I, the reporter, that we might not make it to the other one. So I asked him to go in and call the city desk and tell them our situation, and he did. And the guy on the city desk said, oh, well, you go back and tell Jackson we cannot miss the press conference. That's the most important thing this morning, is Nellie's press conference. So if you can't get Oswald before you have time to get out to the hospital, then just blow this off, and we'll get a picture of Oswald as they bring him into the county jail, which, of course, you know, is right across the street here. Mm-hmm. So he came back and told me that, and I said, "You must be nuts. You know, I'm not about to leave here, because this is the first chance we've had, you know, to really take a good clean shot of Oswald after the night before that." And so, and I wanted a picture too, you know, I mean, I was being selfish there. So anyway, I said, tell him I'm not going to leave, and I knew John Mazziota, chief photographer, he'd back me up on that one. So he went back and passed the word on, and they said, well, don't worry, you guys are off the hook. We're going to send Willie Allen out to the hospital, another photographer who just happened to drop in the paper. So if I had listened to, if I'd have taken those orders and left, where would we be? I wouldn't be here now.
Well, you certainly wouldn't have gotten this photograph right here. I can't express to you guys how extraordinary it is to have the photographer of this picture sitting here and talking with you today. It's a really incredible picture, and it's one that will always be in the history books. It'll always be in the encyclopedia under the Kennedy assassination. It is the photograph that defines the weekend of November 22nd, 1963. Bob, this picture speaks for itself, but would you tell us how this came about?
Well, it was a fairly routine type assignment. We had photographed prisoner transfers before. And so it wasn't, you know, the situation was not a difficult one to shoot, except the people involved were very important. A little more important than your average criminal. And so you didn't want to mess up on that. You want to make sure you got a good picture. So they had told us that they would finally be bringing him down. We had about 5 minutes to get in position, pick a spot. There were 4 still photographers down there and 1 TV pool camera. So that's what was down there to record this. The Dallas News, the Times Herald, me, UPI, and AP each had a photographer down there. So they said, pick a spot, don't move around, we want everybody quiet when we bring him down. So I picked a spot that I thought would be the best, and pre-focused the camera and waited. And so when they said, here he comes, and I could see Jim Lavell's hat, you know, coming over through the crowd there. And so I was looking through the camera, ready. One time I was prepared. And all of a sudden, I'm aware that somebody's stepping out from my right, going to block my picture. I thought, well, why is this guy going? Why is this happening? But I really didn't even have time to think that through, because then he only took about 2 steps, you know, and fired. And if you see the video out there, you can see how quick it was. So he fired and I fired. I mean, it was, you know, I was ready and the gun went off and I fired. Maybe I just jumped when the gun went off. Who knows? Yeah. But I was ready to shoot and I didn't panic. This is the main thing, you know.
Well, you took that photograph and the entire basement just dissolves into chaos. You see it in the video. This is Oswald just a few minutes later being loaded into the ambulance that was brought out there.
Yeah.
This is an interesting photograph because this one is cropped. If you look at the original image, which we don't have to show you today, this is only a small corner of the picture, right?
Right, yeah, it is.
You just held your camera up above your head?
To the best of my recollection, yeah, I just held the camera out. I didn't have time really to compose it and focus and all that.
We're running a little short on time, but just tell us briefly about taking your film back to the Dallas Times Herald and your initial reaction when you saw the picture that won the Pulitzer Prize.
Well, I had to wait at the police station for a while before I was able to go back to the paper, because they wanted to send another photographer there to take my place. They wanted to have somebody at the police station. So I got back to the paper, and when I got off the elevator, people were gathered around the wire machine where pictures are sent over the wire and stories. And they called me over and they said, do you have anything as good as this? And they were showing Jack Beer's picture, which was shot a fraction of a second before mine. And I said, I'll tell you after I run my film if I have anything as good as that. So I wasn't about to spout off at that point. So I went and ran the film, and Mazziotto was standing right outside the door, and I remember holding the wet film up to the light, and it was sharp, and it looked really good to me, and I let out a big yell, and then John and I made a wet print. We didn't even dry the film. We could run the film through a negative carrier as it was wet. It wouldn't hurt it. And then we made a wet print, and we carried the wet print out to the newsroom, and then we all realized we had beaten the Dallas News, which was our #1 goal in those days, you know. So it was pretty exciting after that. You know, I went home with a headache that night. But
1964, then the very next year was a big year for you. You testified to the Warren Commission about seeing the rifle in the window of this building. You won the Pulitzer Prize for the photograph we just looked at, and you also were involved in the Jack Ruby trial for the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald. You were there both as someone who had been subpoenaed to testify in the trial, but also there as a reporter. And so you took pictures like this one of Jack Ruby during the trial wearing the handcuffs.
I have lots of those. He's going down the hall one way, then at the end of the day he's going back the other way, and we had to just wait in the hall, you know, and get what we could. And so this is a good example of shooting in the hall. I couldn't, of course, go in the courtroom.
This was, at the time, called the trial of the century, and you can see here's the courtroom here with the line snaking outside all the way down to the street and out the door there. And there were some security precautions in place that had not been, wasn't really seen before that time.
Yeah, everybody became very security conscious after this, after the weekend, after the 22nd weekend.
You'd have your bag searched and things like that when you walked in?
People patted down. I have pictures of people being patted down. It's kind of funny then, you know. Now it happens all the time, but.
Right. And there's another picture I want to share with you. This is one that you actually won't see in the exhibit here on the 7th floor. This is a testament to the fact that we had to go through hundreds and hundreds of Mr. Jackson's pictures to choose the ones that we actually put in our exhibition here. And this is one that didn't make the cut, but it's a really interesting picture taken during the Jack Ruby trial, and it's interesting because of all this stuff that's taped to the walls very haphazardly. Tell us what we're looking at here, Bob.
Well, those are all photographers. And so when we got bored, you know, we took pictures of each other sometimes. But I took that really at the time just to show all of the equipment that was taped to the walls. And they had cords and everything where they could fire those cameras, you know, from 10 feet away or whatever. And they'd be down on the floor level, and see, they'd bring Ruby down this hall, and so they had those cameras ready to various agencies. The camera that's kind of in the middle, to the left of the middle, that dark blob up there was a Life magazine photographer, and that camera fell off the wall and smashed. It scared everybody too because it made a lot of noise.
Sure.
But anyway, that's what that is.
And then our last picture of the program, here's Jack Ruby talking to reporters. I see this Murphy Martin of ABC, one of Ruby's attorneys, Joe Tonahill, and Travis Lynn of ABC back there. You never actually spoke to Ruby, though, during the entire trial, right?
Never did, no.
But he was pretty eager at all junctions to talk to members of the press.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it wasn't hard to get him to talk.
Well, I want to give you guys a chance. We have a few minutes left for questions. If you will, just raise your hand. Since we are recording this, I'm going to repeat your question so we'll have it on camera, and then Mr. Jackson can answer it. We'll start with you.
What do you think about the assassination of John F. Kennedy?
The question was, what do you think about the assassination of John F. Kennedy?
I think Lee Oswald acted alone. There were 3 shots. That's been proven. Nobody's proved otherwise. So to me, there's no conspiracy. I've always had an open mind to conspiracy, but nobody's ever in 46 years come out with proof that there was a conspiracy.
All right. You right there.
Were you scared, like, when the gun went off when Ruby shot Oswald?
Were you scared when Ruby shot Oswald?
No. I don't remember being scared. I mean, they jumped on him right away, immediately. And I didn't figure he was there to shoot the rest of us. You know, I mean, I knew he was there to kill Oswald after the shot was fired. So, no, I don't remember being afraid.
Back there on the last row in the cast.
Do you think that it would have been changed if Oswald had lived?
History, you mean? Do you think history would be different today had Oswald not been shot by Jack Ruby?
Probably so, yeah. Yeah, that's an easy one to say yes to. Look at all the conspiracy people who are making thousands of dollars off of their books and everything else. If he'd lived, we might have found out the real truth. There wouldn't be nearly as much controversy to keep people busy. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Now looking back, do you wish you would have stayed in the car, or are you glad that you jumped out with still your empty camera?
That's a good question.
It is.
Looking back now, do you wish you had stayed in the car and gone to Parkland, or are you glad you got out and went to Dealey Plaza?
Well, I wish I'd have stayed in the car, because when I did get out, I didn't take any pictures on the grassy knoll. I should have. I should have just started shooting anything, but when this woman, it was obvious that he was hit bad, my only thought was to get to where the president was, because that was my original assignment, was to stay with the president. And I figured somebody else could shoot pictures down here, But, yeah, I wish I'd have stayed in the car.
Okay. The blonde young man back there, yeah.
What was your first instinct when Ruby shot Oswald?
What was your first instinct when Ruby shot Oswald?
Wind the film and shoot another frame, which, because the way flash guns were made in those days, the battery would slowly go down and you'd eventually have to replace the battery. So you had to wait for the flash to recycle. So it's not like today when we have a motor drive on a camera and the flash can just bang, 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 So maybe 5 seconds before that flash would recycle, and that was a lifetime then. And you can see the frame out there, the dark frame, that was the next one. I just went ahead and shot, even though I knew in my mind it wasn't going to take. Then I had to deal with the police. One guy shoving me back. I said, "Get your hand off my camera." He was shoving me back. The police were pretty. It was bedlam down there for a few seconds.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. How did you know it was gunfire when the president was shot?
Well, I'd fired rifles in the Army. I mean, to me, it was a rifle. It was a gunshot to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. In the glasses.
What was the first thing that went through your mind when you heard the gunshots?
For President Kennedy or Oswald? No, I understand. You mean the shooting of President Kennedy or the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald?
President Kennedy.
Okay. What was the first thing that went through his mind?
Somebody shooting at the president.
All right. Yes.
Do you remember, any of the clothes that the people were wearing with the rifle on the window?
Did you notice anything about the person that was firing the rifle in the window?
No, I wish I had. No, all I saw was the barrel and part of the stock, which was just resting on the ledge, I mean, and it was, even if my camera had been loaded, I like to tell myself this anyway, even if my camera had been loaded, I don't think I would have reacted fast enough to swing it up, find the window, focus on it. The rifle would have been gone then anyway, because I just saw it for an instant. Mm-hmm. So that makes me feel better when, when I'm sitting there with an empty camera.
Yeah. Way over here. Yes, sir.
Do you think Oswald was hired as a hitman?
No.
The question was, do you think Oswald was hired as a hitman?
No, I don't think he was hired as a hitman. Right. Then that would be conspiracy of some kind.
Yes.
When Ruby shot Oswald, what did he do? Because Oswald still had a gun.
I mean, no, Ruby still had a gun.
Oh, well, what did the police do when they tackled Ruby since he still had a gun in his hand?
Well, the main thing they do is try to grab the gun out of the arm with the gun, and that's what they did, I'm sure. I mean, it was quick. Now, there was the risk, of course, of one of them getting shot if he'd have pulled the trigger again, but I don't think that was his intent. It wasn't to kill policemen. He loved policemen.
Yeah. In the glasses, yes, ma'am.
When you go back to the spots that you shot, the famous photographs that the shooting of Oswald, what do you think about?
When he goes back to those spots, when you go back to the spot where you shot the famous picture, what do you think?
Well, I've only been back there, I think, maybe once when when they were filming Moment of Impact, which I don't know whether any of you've seen that show. It won an Emmy, and they had several Pulitzer winners, and they took us all back to the scene of the events. It's really good if you ever get a chance to watch it.
We have it on DVD in the museum store.
Yeah, they did a really good job on it, and we went down then, and that's the first time I think I'd been down there, as far as I know. And when did they do that movie? In the 90s, right?
Like 99, yes, about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But what did you feel?
Well, it was kind of creepy, maybe. I don't know. Being the subject of the TV show, well, I'm also worried about what's going on there. You know, I mean, I'm involved in that. If I had just been down there without all these people, you know, it might have made more of an impact on me, but it was kind of strange. I don't know,
We have time for
how to
about
describe
two
it.
more questions. I'll take yours right there, and I'll take that young lady in the back holding the pen. You go first.
How do you feel about Ruby shooting Oswald?
Yeah, what's your opinion of Ruby and his motivation shooting Oswald?
Well, I think Jack Ruby saw himself as a hero in the eyes of people. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah.
He wanted to. Now, he said, didn't he say, the reason I shot Oswald is because I didn't want Jackie Kennedy to have to come to Dallas and go through the ordeal of a trial.
Yeah.
And that might not have ever happened anyway, really.
And the people who knew Ruby have suggested that he wanted to be somebody important, and
Yeah.
what better way than shooting the man who allegedly murdered the president?
Right. He probably felt like he could get away with it. But it is very bizarre that it was like a snap decision almost, because 3 minutes before he shot Oswald, he was down the street at the Western Union office sending a $25 wire to a girl in Fort Worth, one of his girls from the club, who needed money for rent money or something. That was 3 minutes before he shot Oswald. So all he had time to do was walk down the street and walk down the ramp, and he wasn't down there any length of time before they brought Oswald out, and he just shot him. So it's not even like he planned it, because I'm sure he carried a gun all the time anyway.
And that was an important part of the trial, was whether it was a premeditated murder or not.
Yeah.
And our last question, yes, ma'am.
Do you see a connection between how Abraham Lincoln was assassinated and how JFK was assassinated, and how there was a lot of coincidences?
The question is, what do you think about the various coincidences between the shooting of Abraham Lincoln in 1865 and the shooting of John F. Kennedy?
Well, it's kind of interesting to read all that. I don't know that I've formed an opinion on it, but it is kind of creepy, isn't it?
All right, well, that's all the time we have today. Please join me in thanking Bob Jackson for his time.